Hey everybody, what's going on? Hellbite here, bringing another video from Grab the Lantern today. Today I wanted to finally give my guide on how to counter Milio. He hasn't been the kind of champion that a lot of players have had issues with, but he's definitely starting to increase in both pick rate and ban rate, at least as far as I've seen, and certainly I think Milio is the kind of champion that will sucker punch players if they assume they know what he can do and then don't actually know what he can do. I think Milio has a lot of abilities that make him actually quite powerful, and again, I think a lot of times people need to be very careful about what they think he does and what they know he does in order to avoid getting sucker punched. So anyways, I'm going to be talking today about how to counter Milio, giving some general advice, and then moving on to slightly more specific counter picks. Now, one major thing I think players sort of discount when dealing with Milio is his passive. Fired Up deals a surprising amount of damage. This damage scales based off of the person applying its bonus AD. This means that with a Jhin or with another AD champion, there is a lot of magic damage dot being applied by that champion onto any enemies that are damaged. Now, importantly to note with Fired Up, it only applies on the next ability or auto attack that deals damage. The duration of the buff, that is to say, the duration of how long a champion can hold on to that ability without actually using it, is quite small, and it only applies to the first target hit. This means if you have an area of effect ability, something like Varus' Hail of Arrows, and it lands on multiple targets, it will apply to, it will generally prioritize champions, but if you have a piercing skill shot, like Piercing Arrow from Varus, it will only apply to the first target it hits. So even though you may still take the Piercing Arrow, you can at least avoid the bonus damage from Milio's passive, which can be quite potent because of how much damage it's able to actually deal. This also means that Milio is pretty non-synergistic with a mage support, so you don't have to worry as much about that if Milio happens to be paired with a Karthus or a Ziggs or something along those lines. Milio's Q, Ultra Mega Fire Kick, is a very potent tool for him to peel enemy tank supports off. It does mean that if you're playing a champion like Taric or Alistar or Thresh, it can be very difficult to actually close the distance on Milio or his AD carry because of how potent it is at pushing you back. You're also guaranteed to eat both halves of the CC if you are struck by the initial boop backwards. That said, it's Milio's only tool for peeling for his carry. As a result, if he's using it to fish for damage, you have the option of really punishing him for it by then looking for your melee engage, and Milio is sort of out of options for preventing you from doing that. He has some other tools that can sort of soft counter, but nothing as potent as Ultra Mega Fire Kick, so definitely look forward to that cooldown as something that you can punish if he's using it freely. Importantly to note here as well, if Milio Q lands on a minion, it will boop it back a significant further distance than if he hits a champion, and as a result, he can use it to poke from a much greater distance than you may otherwise be expecting. So certainly something to keep in mind if Milio's looking to try and use this to set up a play later. Milio's W, of course, is his most potent cooldown. This is the thing that you should be worried about because it does literally everything for the champion. It applies a heal over time, meaning that you're likely to be out-damaged if you're both trading back and forth. It applies Milio's passive 3 times over its duration, giving them more damage and healing, and of course there is the bonus range facet of it as well. This means that if Milio's pressing W in lane, you should, if you can help it, not fight him or his AD carry at all. 3 applications of Fired Up throughout the duration, on top of the healing, on top of the increased range, just makes it so difficult to deal with targets. That said, there is a limit on how often he can use it. This is his, by far and away, longest cooldown. I think even at maximum rank it's something like a 14-second cooldown. So if Milio is using this ability, he will not have it available. You can back away safely, wait for it to wear out, and then you can go and fight Milio's team now that they no longer have that ability as well. This can apply to every member of Milio's team, but they also all have to be in the area of effect to be to benefit from the healing, and they do have to sort of tap it and then leave, or tap it and stay in it to benefit from the Fired Up proc. And as a result of this, you can punish it. If Milio's team is grouping up on the campfire, that is where you can throw your area of effect damage or look for an engage, now that the entire enemy team is grouped up to try and benefit from the healing, so it is something that you can attempt to punish. The range extension is a difficult one. Ranges are one of those few things that League of Legends players basically have sort of internalized, and anything that affects range is almost always a sucker punch. The second Twisted Fate gets his Fire Cannon, for example, you think you know the range that he has to stun you, then you don't know the range because Fire Cannon, he stuns you, you die, and you're like, oh, alright. And that can be one of the more difficult things to counter with regards to Milio, but you just have to keep in mind that the champion has a longer range than you expect, and therefore to give them a wider berth than you otherwise would. This isn't to say that you have to back all the way off, for example, but it does mean that you have to try and at least say, there is increased range here, I have to be worried about more damage landing from me from a range that I don't otherwise expect. Milio's E, there's not a lot to talk about. It's a shield. It gives bonus movement speed to the target when it's applied, and that lasts as long as the shield does, which is nice. There are 2 charges of this ability, so do keep in mind if you get the first Milio shield, he still has a shield in the bank, potentially, because he can store 2 charges, but both shields aren't very strong shield-wise, unless he's maxing it first, which does give you the option of potentially countering Milio's AD carry or Milio himself once the shields have both been committed, or even if only one's been committed, it's not as much shield as if he layers both of them onto the target at the same time. Finally, Milio's ultimate, of course, is the other big cooldown that you have to worry about. The most important part of this is there is an area of effect cleanse, which can, or an area of effect heal, which can be relevant, but mostly it's all about the cleanse. The key to remember with the cleanse, generally cleanse isn't that big of a deal because it just kind of says the play, whatever it was that you were trying to set up, is no longer going to happen. For example, a Morgana Binding lands on one of Milio's friends, you start walking forward to punish, Milio cleanses it, they walk away, nothing happens, right? What we want to keep in mind, that therefore, is to not overcommit to a crowd control ability landing on a target with a Milio nearby. Because of the fact that if you do something like the Morgana Bind lands, you flash into range to try and go for the follow-up, and then Milio cleanses it and the target walks away anyways, well, now you're down a summoner spell in exchange for a much shorter cooldown, and you kind of look and feel like the fool. Importantly as well, this ability does not cleanse Milio himself. If he is CC'd, he cannot use that ability, and this means that if you are looking to set up a pick, or you are looking to set up an engagement, you have to make sure that Milio is crowd controlled alongside everything else with your initial engagement, because that way he can't use this ability to cleanse anyone else that has been snared. If he takes the Morgana Binding, for example, he's screwed. There's nothing he can do about that. If he takes the Sejuani ultimate, he can't cleanse that because he's stunned. He can't actually use that ability. And that then gives you an option to proceed with the rest of the fight from there. Even though you didn't get it onto a priority target, you still remove the Milio, and that still puts you at a numbers advantage. And this also means that because it's a cleanse, it doesn't remove any displacement effects, which means that if you're playing a tank with a displacement effect, such as, I don't know, Malphite ultimate, you're able to then set this up regardless, because Milio can't actually cleanse that. The burst heal is nice, but it's not all that, and when you take Milio's entire kit into consideration, with the double shield from his E, his ultimate heal, and then the heal over time from his W, it's not actually as potent as you might think. I think a lot of other enchanters like Lulu have a much better time of stacking all of their abilities on a single target to keep them alive. They do that job much better than Milio, and that means that Milio's burst defense isn't as good as a lot of other enchanters, and it does give you the option of potentially trying to burst somebody down. Obviously, he can still layer defenses, so you do have to keep that in mind, but it's definitely a lot weaker than you would otherwise expect on some other champions. Moving on to specific counter picks, therefore, one of the best things you can do is play Assassins. Milio himself is not very mobile. He has the movement speed off of his E, and a single Q that he can maybe use to bail himself out of danger, and that's it. He's a very squishy young lad, and as a result, if you're playing an Assassin, you can just kind of press your buttons and burst him. Assassins especially tend to not have any crowd control at all, or very much crowd control, and as a result, Milio's cleanse doesn't really do anything for him anyways. You just kind of press all your buttons on the target, and Milio isn't really able to keep them alive through that, because again, his healing and shielding isn't that potent in the grand scheme of things, and you're able to just kind of kill people without Milio's ability to deal back with them. Zed, for example, is a very good target, or Talon, both of whom can punish Milio in the early stages of the game when he's just not that strong, and when healing over time just isn't that potent. One of the other kinds of champions you can play to help counter Milio are tanks with non-cleansable crowd control. Right, this is talking about champions like Ornn or champions like Malphite. These champions basically don't have important crowd control effects that Milio can cleanse, and as a result, he just kind of has to watch as the Malphite rockets towards his face and kills his entire team, and he can't really cleanse them out of a bad situation. The kinds of tanks you should be avoiding are tanks with cleansable crowd control effects, champions like Amumu or Sejuani. If you happen to find yourself in this scenario anyways, you picked Amumu first, for example, and then Milio is locked in right afterwards, you just need to make sure that when you use your crowd control ability, that it applies to the Milio as well. Otherwise, it's not going to matter that you got a 4-man Amumu ultimate, because the 5th man that you didn't ult was the Milio. He cleansed his team, and then you're on the losing end of the team fight, in comparison to landing it on all of them, and then it actually has an opportunity to maybe work out. Finally, in bot lane as well, you want to be avoiding the kinds of AD carries that have potent pick tools or the kinds of supports that have potent pick tools. Melee champions, I think, can work, especially if they have a very quick way of engaging. Alistair, for example, is very good at this because he doesn't really lead into the headbutt. The second he's in the headbutt animation, you have a very small amount of time to react, and by the time you're coughing up Milio Q, it might already be too late, and Alistair might have already gotten the headbutt pulverized down. But what you don't want to be playing are champions with very telegraphed setups. Taric, for example, is a very bad choice because Dazzle, you'll always see coming, you'll always be able to boop him back, and there's not much she can do from that position. Leona as well, you can see her projecting the Zenith Blade, you have opportunities to line up the Q, and then as she's trying to dash forward, she's not actually untargetable, she can be booped out of that, and then you just kind of walk away because Leona can't do anything from that point onwards. Thresh as well can work. Thresh naturally doesn't have to commit if he lands a hook. Alternatively, you can play a champion like Blitzcrank, where Milio can't really do anything about Blitzcrank because if a hook lands, well, you can't cleanse the displacement effect, so the target just kind of dies. And this also means avoid a champion like Ashe in the bot lane. Enchanted Crystal Arrow looks very powerful, except when the Milio can cleanse it, and then you don't get any value off of that, right? Especially when Ashe is also going to try and play the hook game, which Milio is going to be very adept at stuffing. Instead, looking for more all-in centric lanes, champions like Samira or Draven are going to do very, very well into Milio as well. Anyways, that is going to be it for me today, guys. Thank you all so very much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this, and let me know what your tips for dealing with Milio are down in the comment section below as well. I would love to hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed the video today, go ahead and leave a like, and if you really enjoyed the video, consider subscribing. I upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days as well. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it, and I'll talk to you all later.